Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. It's all about making monsters, creating monsters, and we're going to go down the dark side today. It's all about vampires. That's right. Vampires are on the menu, or are vampires going to have you on the menu? It could be one of those. Anyway, I have organised a poll for you that you can take part in if you want to. I would suggest grabbing some food, some drink, and making sure you are comfortable. And we will get into this because we're going to do some design work around making monsters today. Okay. Everything seems to be working all right, which is good. So I would say this is going to take maybe 25 minutes, 30 minutes, just because it is a vampire creature, a little bit more complicated than other things. Anyway, let's get moving. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Weller, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically, the version of Dungeons and Dragons that I want to talk about is Shadowdark. Shadowdark is a version of D&D, a combination of 5e, AD&D, and basic D&D, if you ask me. And we're going to go through the process of making a vampire mist, or a vampiric mist, or vampiric cloud, or vampiric something that revolves around this. It's one of my favourite monsters because it almost feels like an extension of the vampire. So the vampiric mist, cloud, fog, whatever you want to however you want to describe it, whatever you want to call it, that is the goal for today. Work on that as a project. But before I get started and show you my Google document and start working through the process of making one for Shadowdark RPG in stat block, I'm going to ask you some questions. One question, that is, how would you go about making your own vampiric mist? So, here we go. How would you make the vampiric mist stat block for Shadowdark RPG? I think that's it. How would you make the Vampiric Mist stat block for Shadowdark RPG? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I've done in a Google document and show you the process for doing so you know how to do this stuff yourself. And then I'm going to come back to chat and have a look and see what you have in terms of feedback. Okay? Nice and simple. Very, very simple. Easy, easy, easy peasies. So with any luck, I'll be able to pull this up nice and quick. Believe so. Yes, there it is. And I've talked about vampiric mist or clouds many times before. It's not the first time at all. I've done quite a few things on it. Anyway, this is in conjunction with H.A. Pickett when he is finally available. He's not quite available yet, so I'm still doing this sort of thing without him. But anyway, doesn't matter. I don't know if this is draft 19. It's probably not draft 19. It is currently the 15th of October here in New Zealand. We're not doing monster lore right now. We are doing the monster stat block for the vampiric mist. So there we go. I'm going to call it the vampire cloud or vampire fog or something like that eventually. A grey cloud with wriggling tendrils. Essentially that's how I've described it. You could also describe it as a red and grey cloud. I don't think that would be a problem either. We could go here, a red and grey cloud with wriggling tendrils. This evil fog drains blood from living creatures to survive. Essentially, that's what it does. Yep. So the first thing we've got to do is figure out the monster level for this little sucker. And in this case, I looked at AD&D. I looked at the 5e monster as well to decide how I would go about doing this. In the end, surprisingly, this is one of those occasions where things sort of fall in line pretty well, believe it or not. I was quite surprised myself. So looking at Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the second version, and looking at the Monstrous Manual, what I discovered was I usually use the hit points as an indicator of the monster level. And it says hit dice 3. So I thought, okay, monster level 3. And of course, I always sort of line that up and make sure that that's going to sit in line. Well, how does that sit in line with 5e? Because challenge rating in 5e is not a very good indicator. And much to my surprise, they had challenge rating 3. I feel like this is one of those times where 5e kind of got their monster level right, that it probably should be a monster level 3 creature. To be fair, this is a very nasty beastie, but it's also incredibly vulnerable too, in many respects. I don't know that the stat block makes that obvious, but so this is why the monster level for this creature is 3, monster level 3, based on AD&D and 5e. And then an alignment, its alignment is usually evil, so I've gone with chaotic. That's from AD&D, and really that's also from 5e as well, so that's nice and simple. And then armor class, I can't use AD&D armor class because it's a descending armor class rather than ascending. It doesn't go up, it goes down. So I have to really kind of look at what they're doing with the likes of 5e. And so they had put down an armor class of 13, which is why I've put down 13 as the armor class. Remember, Shadowdark is a meshing or an sort of an extension of 5e, basic D&D, and AD&D. So that's why I put that number down. Now, will that make any sense? Well, usually armor class is determined by 10 plus your dexterity modifier. We're going to have to figure out what our dexterity modifier is. We'll get there eventually. And then, of course, we got our hit points. We'll do them in a second. But what we want to do is do the stats, or the ability scores, or ability modifiers. Now, you don't record ability scores in Shadowdark. It's just the modifier that's important. So going through, and I just looked at 5e, and generally, if I didn't agree with something, I might have done something, but I think most of the time I just followed it. Honestly, I don't think its stats really matter that much, but here we go. So in 5e, it's a 6 for their strength, so that's a modifier of +2, so that's why the strength modifier is -2, not +2. And then dexterity was a 16, so that's a +3 modifier, easy. Constitution is a 16 as well, so that's a +3 modifier. Intelligence, now they had the intelligence of this creature as being quite low, at a 6, minus, I believe -2. I did not really, I wasn't sold on that idea. I have bumped it up. I don't think that the Vampiric Mist is a incredibly intelligent vampire-like creature, but I felt like it was too far of a departure from the original. So I have gone with using kind of the intelligence level of the vampire that's used in Shadowdark in the core rulebook. So I worked more with that. I felt like they would at least still be better and more intelligent than the likes of, say, I guess, an average person, which would be a 0 modifier. Vampiric Mists tend to sort of not have had all the memories of their previous life necessarily. So this is one of those numbers that potentially could change. So we'll put a yellow mark there. Wisdom, they had it down as a 12, which is a +1. I decided that was still kind of too low. I felt like this sort of creature really needed to know how to survive, and I think wisdom is probably even more important than the intelligence in terms of survival. And like if you want to talk about being smart, high wisdom is far more important than high intelligence. There are some dumbass shit people out there that have got a high level of intelligence but as stupid as shit. So I know for some people that might be a bit hard to understand, but there is a difference between knowledge and knowledge applied, and knowledge applied is wisdom. So I thought I would push that up. I'm not going to change that. I think that's fine for this monster. And then its charisma is a 7 on the stat block, which is a -2. I kept that. So the only things I really changed was the intelligence and the wisdom in the stats. Okay, so that's that bit. How fast does it move? Well, in 5e, it had a fly speed of 30 feet. So move, near, 30 feet near is essentially the same. Fly, in brackets, nice and simple. And then when it comes to the likes of AD&D and how fast the creature would move, like it has a movement of 12. It has different speed when it's substantial, but I decided that was too much nuance to imply to a stat block in Shadowdark. It would just confuse people. So 12 is kind of comparative to near fly speed. And it doesn't say fly, but essentially it is fly. So yeah, 12 being close enough to near. So that's why I've got that there. Next, hit points. How do we determine hit points? Very simple. We go to the table that I put onto Patreon in the free tier. You can go get this for free. Don't have to pay a thing. And it shows you how to build your monsters. So it's a level 3 monster. And we need to determine how many hit points it's going to have. It's going to have between 12 and 17 hit points. But there is a formula that's very specific for figuring out the hit points for a monster in Shadowdark, and that is a d8. So you take the average of a d8, which is 4.5, multiply it by the monster level, and add the Constitution modifier only once, no matter how many monster levels there are. That's it. It's nice and simple, not confusing. So I grab my calculator and I go 4.5, multiplied by the monster level, which is 3. Comes out at 13.5, and then I have to also add on the Constitution modifier, which is in this case a 3. It's right here, right? So we'll add that on as well. So plus 3 gets 16.5. So we're not going to round up. We're going to round down. So it goes down to a 16. Okay, we don't worry about the 0.5. So there it is. That was easy enough. Not hard to do. Okay, now attacks. How do we figure out our attacks? Again, we go back to that table I was showing you, and it shows you monster level at 3, and the number of attacks we should get is between 1 and 2. Okay, so I decided because you get between 1 and 2 attacks, we're going to have 2 tendril attacks, and there's also a blood drain feature, which almost, I mean, to a large extent, you might say maybe a bit much in terms of overkill, but it's a Vampiric Mist. I think it kind of needs to have that level of scariness, so that's why I've allowed this. Quite often when I'm doing a Shadowdark monster and it's got an extra ability that does like more hit point damage or has something else going on, I will tone down the number of attacks, because it's got a secondary attack that's essentially like a secondary like a second attack. So so you might say this has kind of got 3 attacks, not 2. It's the type of attack that it's doing. It's the only reason I'm doing it this way. And you might say, well, actually, if anything, considering the type of blood drain that you've written down, it's probably comparable to, making a 3rd attack. That might be the case. I'm not going to dispute that. But right now, I'm going to go with this. So 2 tendril attacks. Okay, now what would our attack bonus normally be? In this case, our attack bonus can be anything for a monster that's level 3 to level 3, 0 to 4. I find 3 is probably better than 0. So between 3, 4, or 2. So from 3 up or down 1 point is usually the best way to go. But you go back and you have a look at your strength modifier and your dex modifier, and I've got a dex modifier of +3. It makes perfect sense that the Vampiric Mist should be able to use its tendrils and use dexterity for the attack rather than strength, because it's cloud. it's a misty thing. It's not really strength that it's using. It's just using one of these. It's a finessable thing as far as I'm concerned. So I went with strength being +3. It could be +4. It absolutely could be, but I'm not going to push it quite as high as that. +3 is good enough, as long as it's not lower than +3. Yeah, could go up, but I wouldn't go down just because of that dexterity modifier. Next, how much damage do I do with this type of monster? A D4 or D6? So I looked at this and I thought, well, it's vampire. This is not, I mean, it's a level 3 monster, but it's still a Vampiric Mist. So I want to go for the high end. This thing should be able to be really bad up close, because that's really all it can do is stuff up close. So I gave it a D6, okay, the top end dice in terms of damage. And then it's got its blood drain feature, which we'll explain in a second. So you can see I have used that table to construct most of the various bits and pieces. Our attack bonus, our number of attacks, our damage output per attack, our hit points. Armor class sits between 8 and 17, and I've got a 13, so that's fine. Difficulty class, we'll come back to that in a second. This is for your treasure, poor or normal for a creature like this. And then, of course, your stat modifiers. Like the lowest end should be like a -4 and the top end a +4. And I'm well within all of that when you look at the stats. Okay? All right, so now I needed to have a look at how to form this creature into something that made sense as a Vampiric Mist based on AD&D, Shadowdark's Vampire, and the 5e version. In the end, I decided that the best way to structure this was 3 different abilities. The first one being unique undead. So immune to morale check, so it won't run away. Okay? A morale check will not work. It will fight until it's destroyed. And one of the things you'll notice is the vampire is listed as being a supreme undead, so immune to morale checks. This is the one feature where immune to morale checks may not be suitable. It might well be that a Vampiric Mist should be afraid of potentially being destroyed. It is a lower level vampiric creature, but I also had the level 5 Vampiric Spawn from Shadowdark, and it has greater undead, and it says here immune to morale checks. And so this is like 2 levels lower than that. But my general feeling was there was a theme coming along that I felt like it's a Vampiric Mist, it's probably not going to run. Vampire Spawn don't run, the vampires don't run, you're not going to scare them off. You're going to have to deal with them. And of course, they also include a section that says they can only be damaged by a magical source. That's for the vampire. The vampire spawn, though, can be damaged by silver or magical sources. And so I decided to look more at the writing of how the vampire spawn was done, rather than the full-blown vampire, which is like, it doesn't matter if it's necessarily silver, it just needs to be a magical source. And I think the reason why I did this is there is sort of precedence in the history of the vampire that silver was something that they did not like having any contact with. And it kind of got lost in Shadowdark, probably to try to make the vampire tougher and more dangerous than the vampire spawn. But I decided that actually it probably should still be there. So I left silver or magical sources. Okay, so that's that feature. So that's how I sort of structured. I used the stat blocks from this based on what I knew from the other stat blocks in AD&D, 5e, and the history. And then Formless is really passing through a narrow space. It can pass through a narrow space. That's how it can move. It's not going to be trapped very easily. Now, when I say narrow space, it's as narrow as long as there's a space that it can move through it. All right, there's no 1 inch space or half an inch space or 1 foot spaces. Couldn't care less. That's not important in Shadowdark, and it's all about as long as there's a space, they can move through it. That's all it needs to be. And this allows them to escape and to move through and be obviously a threat to somebody, move through a keyhole or whatever. So I put in Formless. Now Formless is drawn from one of the other monsters in Shadowdark and how they have written it up. I kind of used that as a sort of a... I looked at the oozes because some of them sort of have a feature that kind of allows them to squeeze through a space. So yeah, I've gone with that. I've looked at what 5e was doing, and I've looked at how they sort of operated within AD&D as well. Okay, the last feature was the most difficult one, which was the blood drain, because the blood drain is supposed to regain hit points for the vampire and drain away constitution. In other words, you are essentially hurting somebody fairly significantly. They will eventually die. So I structured it this way. Vampire Cloud heals 1d6 hit points and target permanently loses 1d4 constitution. You'll notice that there's no DC. I decided that I was not going to include a DC for this, mostly because of how I had seen other things structured. So, for example, the vampire has a blood drain feature in Shadowdark, and it's structured very much the same way. The only difference is it does 2d6. I decided I would drop it down to 1d6 because it's a monster level 3, not a monster level 11. Okay, and then the blood drain feature again for the vampire spawn, very, very similar. So what I did is I just made it a little less. You might say, well, hang on, 1d4 constitution permanently lost is a big deal. And I absolutely agree. Could it be a 1d2? Absolutely, but I at this point, I'm willing to just let it be and ride and see how it goes. The idea being that, if you die, you become a vampire cloud rather than or mist rather than a vampire spawn. I thought that was far more interesting, sort of creating more of itself. So that was the easy way to sort of do all of that. That's how I structured it for this monster. And yeah, you can, of course, build it however you like. That's up to you. No problems. So let's go to chat and see what you guys had to say. And over here, let's have a look. Oh, we've got some people chiming in. I'm going to be interested to see what we've got here. Is there somebody who's going to say something that is going to trigger a, they're right. So first person, Trenaku, is it Trenaku? Trenaku, I think it's Trenaku. I tend to introduce vampires to my players as potential allies who can give a lot of lore and assist from behind the scenes. In this case, I'd make the mist an alternate form of a vampire. This is one of the reasons why I structured the stat block for the Vampiric Mist or Vampire Cloud the way that it is. I wanted it to be sort of like a lesser version of the vampire, but not so different that you couldn't potentially use it that way. So Trinaka, I was thinking very much about that. Although the origins of the Vampire Mist is sort of like it's a vampire that failed to do what it needed to do, and it's an in-between state, right? But it doesn't have to be used that way. Fred Huber is a patron and a moderator. Thanks for being here, Fred. When the fog really us trying to kill you. When the fog really us trying to kill you. I'm confused by what you're saying, but okay. I wouldn't let it inflict any permanent stat damage. I'm sure you that would be your recommendation. I'm still going to do that, and the reason being is that permanent stat damage is a thing in Shadowdark. It is a thing. It is what vampires do. It is what the vampire spawn does. And because of that, I think the vampire cloud or mist should also do the same thing. So I hear what you're saying, but I'm still going to do it. That would stress me as a player. And it's supposed to. That's the thing. It's absolutely supposed to stress you. One of the things about the Vampire Mist in 5e is it's a waste of your time. I don't know why you'd even bother using it for the sake of just having a fluffy cloud that's supposedly called a vampire. That's really all it is. But it makes sense that it would be able to inflict a whole party, affect a whole party at one time. I don't know about that. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I get where you're getting. I don't think it needs to be an area effect. It's just going to be targeting one creature when it does its thing. I also like the idea of using this form to extort players when you're losing HP to an invisible sentient enemy. That's a lot of. So the Vampiric Mist is not actually invisible. It doesn't have an invisible form. So that's another thing, is like it's not intended to be that way. But if you wanted to use it that way, maybe you could. But I wouldn't necessarily do it that way. Hello, Calrel. How are you? Did you know technically there are 2 versions of AD&D First Ed? Yes. Well, there's quite a few actually. Technically, there were 2 versions of AD&D First Ed Edition. I believe that the same may be said for Second as well. And like if we talk about version 3, you might say, well, for version 3, there's 2 versions. There's 3.5, but you could say that there's essentially an interim one as well in between 3 and 3.5. And even a sort of, I guess, a 3.75, which without using Paizo. So a lot of the versions of D&D kind of had bits like that. So yeah, I'm aware that within each version there are there are versions of versions. Anyway, tactics have pipes running through the buildings. Only the mist can fit through it. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you could do it that way if you wanted them to go through a pipe or a small space, for sure. Now, I will remind you that I found that the vampire in Shadowdark is far superior to the 5e vampire. And I've run the 5e vampire and I've run the Shadowdark vampire. Okay, it's far superior, the Shadowdark one. It is actually a significant threat. I think when my party came up against vampires in Shadowdark, they actually had to face 2. I think they were about level 8 or 9, which is a tough fight. And it really, I think Magic Circle was what really sort of saved their butt. But one of them actually got reduced to 0 constitution during that fight. And there were some other things that kind of crept into that fight that was sort of accidental as well. But so that did make the whole thing a lot more difficult. So one of the players dropped to 0 constitution, but they had a magic item that gives them 18 constitution. So they're still alive as long as they leave that on themselves. Another character who's still playing and actually is still able to play that character perfectly fine has a constitution of now 4, which can't be restored. She does have access to wish. If she wanted to have wish, she could. But I have to say, she hasn't used it. So even if you permanently reduce somebody's constitution in Shadowdark, because your constitution score is really not that important, it really isn't that important in Shadowdark, getting it reduced down to a minus is actually not a huge deal, particularly if you're playing with a character who's level 8 or 9. Do you know what I mean? Because you're not adding that negative modifier every single level of your character. So it's not a big deal. Just wanted to say you are my favorite D&D channel. Are you kidding? I would be shocked and surprised to hear that's the case. What I suggest you do is you take what I've done with the Vampire Mist, if you're playing Shadowdark, and you change it the way you want it to be. This is what I want you guys to do, is make stuff the way you want it to be. Like, that's where it should go. You have a great communication style, and I really like, really speak to a lot of the questions I have as a GM. Cheers. No problems. Is this your full-time occupation now? No, it's not. I don't have a full-time occupation anymore. I'm 54 years old. I've paid off my mortgage after the pandemic. I work in the health sector. It just about broke me working in the health sector during the pandemic. I really didn't want to work ever again after that, frankly. And so I just paid my mortgage off by just working myself into the ground and pretty much almost killing myself. And as a result, the only way to sort of not wind up dying is I've had to go from 5 days a week full-time job to 3 days a week. And instead of live streaming 6 days a week, I now do it only 2 days a week, and I put out a lot less stuff. So I am semi-retired in my day job and semi-retired on YouTube. And that's sort of how I live. I do a lot of gardening. I work on my house. I'm paving my outside with paving stones right now. And I'm doing a lot of publishing. Trying to fix a lot of stuff and make a lot of stuff before I'm no longer here. I guess that's where my head is at. Okay. I'm going to end this poll. It looks to me like nobody had anything that I was really going to pay attention to today, apparently. I may regret it. The thing to remember about making a monster for any game system, and this is the stat block that I have. I'll put this up onto Patreon, by the way, for the paid tier. The thing to remember about anything is it's all very well putting it down on paper, but you have to play test it. You have to test it out and see what it's like, right? This is a level 3 monster. So I should be able to put this up against level 1 characters, level 2 characters, level 3 characters. Anything above level 3 shouldn't be an issue either. But it should be something that I can incorporate into a game, at least at level 1 for level 1 characters. It may be a bit much for a 0 level character, because 0 level characters kind of die. You just blow on them and they fall over, just because of the way the gauntlet is created. So yeah, you have to play test this stuff. It might look fine on paper. I often find when I make a monster, whether it's for 5e or for Shadowdark, and then I play test it, because I've play tested a couple of them, there's a couple of things that tend to happen. It works out the way I was expecting and seems to be right. Or I thought it was going to be really tough and it's not. That happens a lot, quite often. Other times, it doesn't look like it's a threat, and for some strange reason, it is. And so, of course, when that happens, when I think it should be fine on paper, and I don't have any concerns about how I've designed it, and yet there was a threat to the problem, I have to do it again. I have to test again, because was it because of my dice rolls, the players' dice rolls? Was it because of poor tactics? Are my players just stupid? Was I just really, really smart? Like, was there a factor coming in that kind of unbalanced the whole testing process? So you've got to test it more than once. So that's what I would say. This is a monster where I would expect I would have to trim it or tidy it down a little bit, but quite often it doesn't seem to be the case, I've found. And one of the reasons you'll find this, since I've been play testing some monsters for Shadowdark a little bit recently, is because a lot of the monsters for Shadowdark, this game system, are based off older versions of D&D. There's a little problem that kicks in for those of you who haven't figured it out. And that is, when you base your system off a previous version of D&D, it comes with all the baggage. So Shadowdark is based off 5e. Like, it's based off essentially this book, right? This version. Now, whether it's the newer version of the 2025 Monster Manual, it really didn't matter, because there's not that much. I mean, some of the higher level monsters had some significant changes. Lower level monsters didn't really change that much. But it's based off this. And this is not a well-developed book. I know this because I was a playtester, beta and alpha playtester behind closed doors. I know what my testing was like, because I did a lot of the testing. I'm in the book as a playtester, so I know what the deal is. So when you base this off this, you're going to have problems. And when you base it off a D&D, which is quite removed, or even basic D&D, and you're kind of lining this up, and it's not necessarily going to be exactly the same, again, you will have significant mathematical and game-like problems, because they're not exactly the same game. So, yeah, just a thing to remember. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here. Like I said, you'll find the table for making your own monsters on the free tier for my Patreon, and the paid tier will be on the actual stat block itself will be on the paid tier, and with a whole bunch of other stuff as well, of course. And I'm going to get out of here. You can get on with your day, then I can get on with my day, and life will be good. I don't know. What are we going to exit with? Let's exit with Titanic. Dear. Anyway, thank you for watching and listening. I do appreciate it. Thank you for taking part in the poll. Don't feel bad if I didn't take on your suggestions and ideas, because honestly, it's not really about that. I want you to go and make changes yourself. You should do this, okay? And thank you to all of my paid patrons, because without you, I really wouldn't be able to do this. I really do appreciate your support. Your continued support means that I get to stay on YouTube a little bit longer before I have to pack it all up. So thank you so much. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.